welcoming Dr. Stephanie Stollar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that warm welcome. I am really honored and happy to be here with all of you today. This is really amazing to look out and see so many literacy specialists in a state that has so many awesome supports around literacy and MTSS. So this is really an honor for me. I do travel all around the country, and I don't see this level of support everywhere that I go. So to have somebody like yourselves in every single district around the state is truly amazing. Sometimes I think you don't have a perspective. You only work in North Carolina, so you think everybody's doing this. But that is definitely not the case. I'm going to be spending a little bit of time talking about what I think are some key findings in the reading research. But I'm going to do that with the understanding that you already know that information. This is high-level group here. So you already know the information. What I want to attempt to do is talk about the implications of what's in the reading research for building your system, your multi-tiered system of support. Okay? So I'm going to start with the definition of the science of reading. You're all familiar with this definition, using this definition. You have the guide, a physical copy of the guide. It's nice. This gives us all a way to have a common definition, a common understanding of what the science of reading is. And we created this definition mostly knowing that this phrase, science of reading, would become like a buzzword, which it has, and that then that would open up the opportunity for people to misunderstand or throw in everything but the kitchen sink and call it science of reading, right? So this was an attempt to put some parameters around what this means and doesn't mean. And there's actually content in the guide that explicitly points that out. What is the science of reading, what the science of reading is not. What people sometimes don't catch about that defining guide is that multi-tiered systems of support is actually part of the definition of the science of reading. This is not something separate. It's not something different. Another thing I love about what's happening here in North Carolina is this attempt to de-silo at your Department of Ed level, and then hopefully at your district level, to bring down those barriers that separate professionals so that we can come together and do the difficult but urgent work for students. So understanding that multi-tiered systems of support is the framework for implementing the science of reading. It's the delivery mechanism. It's the way we get the science of reading implemented in schools. When we first started using this terminology, people who didn't understand how MTSS was connected went on a little bit of a shopping expedition. I'm sure this didn't happen in North Carolina. This was in less informed states. They went out and did a little bit of shopping of, I need to get a different program that says science of reading on the cover, right? So I need a phonics program, and I need a spelling program, and I need a phonemic awareness program, and I need a fluency program. And as long as it says science of reading on the cover, then we're good. It's just about swapping out the programs. And it may come to be that you need to make a change to your instructional materials, but there's certainly a lot more to it. And what we're going to talk about today is not making those kinds of changes until you have some understanding of what's in the reading research and you know what your students need. Because MTSS is the delivery mechanism for getting the research into practice. It's the way that we contextualize what's in the research. We can't just take any particular research study and say, oh, I'm going to go do that with my students. The science of reading is not a single study, right? It's a body of evidence, a vast body of evidence. And even when we have multiple replications, different studies by different people with different kinds of kids, even in different countries, there's no guarantee that what was found in the research will actually work with your students. So the system has to get set up in a way that understands what students need understands the resources that are available in your school and your school community, and brings the resources and needs together with the research. So that's my approach. That's been my mission for 30 years now. I've been talking about exactly these same topics since I went to graduate school in 1988. So this is familiar territory. I'm not tired of these topics yet. There's a lot of ways we've moved forward, a lot of advancements that we've made in that time period, but we still have work to do. So that's the approach and message that I'm going to be bringing to you today. We're going to be talking about the MTSS model. I didn't use yours, I'm using mine, but I stole a little piece of an image from your state to talk about what I call the base of my cone. Some people call it a triangle. For me, it's three-dimensional. I'm not a good graphic artist, so it doesn't look three-dimensional, but that's why there's words that go along with the picture. That's what I'm trying to convey, is that we recognize that MTSS is beyond just academic support. It's beyond reading and literacy. It's beyond primary, elementary grades. But for me, I focus on reading in the primary grades. Okay, it's not just about this tiered model. Tiered instructional supports is an important component of MTSS, but it's not all there is. And so I put a base to my triangle. This is the way that we started depicting it when Ohio used to have an MTSS model. We were one of the first states to have an integrated academic and behavior support approach. It doesn't exist in my state anymore. That's another story for happy hour someday, maybe, because I have to have an adult beverage to tell that sad story. So I'm not still showing the academic and behavior side because I just, for my own career, focus on literacy. But I am still showing the base to try to remind people that it's not just about tiered instruction. It's certainly not about an alternate route to special education. It's not just about paperwork that gets completed to move students through hoops, a different set of hoops than the hoops we used to use, right? Like a lot of misunderstandings. We're going to talk about all those today. But what I'm showing here is the traditional shape, okay? It is a triangle, way back to its origins in public health. This is work that Rob Horner and George Sagai and folks out of Oregon did to transfer what's a public health model of prevention first into behavioral supports and then eventually into support around reading. And I think the field is still exploring what this means for subjects other than reading, what it means at the secondary level, and so forth. Those are future research is needed. But the idea of it being shaped this way is important. It's not shaped this way. Your triangle cannot be upside down because your triangle is not about the students. I'll talk about those numbers to the left in just a second. But it's shaped this way to convey, just like we would in public health about disease prevention, we are conveying the opportunity to prevent reading failure. It's one of the most important findings in all of the reading research, that we actually can, by the way we teach in kindergarten and first grade, prevent almost every student from failing to learn to read. Or to say it differently, we can get almost every student to become a reader by the end of first grade. So this is about doing the low resource, everyday kind of easy to implement sorts of things with everyone that reduces risk. Okay, so I've started using this phrase for some of my talks. Tier 1 instruction is risk reduction, to remind people about the origins of this model, where this image actually comes from. So just like in public health, where if we want to prevent the flu from spreading, what are the easy to implement, not expensive, everybody can do it things we do to prevent the flu? Wash your hands. What else? Stay home if you're sick. It's a good one. People don't do that enough. I heard something else. Take your vitamins. Be healthy. I think I heard sneeze into your elbow, right? Like don't cough on people, right? It doesn't cost a lot. Everybody can do it. It's primary prevention of the flu. That's what Tier 1 classroom reading instruction should be. The way we do business with everybody as like our typical common, everybody gets it. The way we teach reading the first time around is our best opportunity. It should be shrinking risk. So the primary prevention, that's the biggest section of this graphic because everybody's getting it, okay? And we should use what we know in the research to benefit all students is the idea. So everybody gets Tier 1. Nobody's coming out of Tier 1 to get their reading intervention or their EL service or their SLP service, et cetera, et cetera. It's universal, okay? Universal instruction. And then on top of that, not instead of that, so it's not a swap out, but it's in addition to, it's additive. Some students who are still at risk after getting the high quality core instruction, some students will need something more, right? But the idea of this resource allocation piece is that we can't provide more intensive instructional support to very many students. Why? Because it's intensive, right? It takes more resources, it takes more time, it takes more highly trained people, it takes different kinds of materials, more instructional minutes, more frequent monitoring, right? Those are all the variables around which the system of support can be more intensive. So it's a layering on. And you'll notice that there are blurred barriers between the tiers in this image. They're not solid lines. So whether you have 3 tiers or you have 2 tiers, doesn't much matter. This is not a layering on of 3 different programs. There's nothing more confusing to a struggling reader than having different instructors teaching different things in different ways with different materials and routines, right? So a blurred line, and students are moving up and moving down, right? So it's flexible in terms of matching to what students need. Now I've added these horizontal arrows thanks to my doctoral student, Amanda Nickerson, who has helped me to realize that low-performing and high-performing students need differentiation. They need intensification. They need instruction around literacy that is matched to their needs. So this is about all students. I personally am focused on students who are struggling readers, but that doesn't mean that our system shouldn't be supporting all readers. So that's what those horizontals are about. Now, I just want to say something about the numbers out to the left-hand side. Just a small little history lesson. When this model was first conceptualized, back in the late 90s, there were not multiple, well, let me say it this way. We didn't have universal screening. And it's like hard to even think that that could have been the case. We had curriculum-based measurement that we did with individual students, but we didn't have a way, we didn't use those curriculum-based measures, those direct assessments like you have now, oral reading fluency, for example. We didn't use those universally to screen all students. That was an advancement that came later. But the only tool that we really had for doing that kind of work that had goals was DIBELS, which is now called Acadience. And it wasn't even called DIBELS back then. It was still like a twinkle in the eye of Roland Good and Ruth Kaminsky. The benchmark goals that they were creating were designed to be the lowest acceptable score. They were by design where you want your lowest, most struggling reader to score. This is still true with your DIBELS 8th edition. Although those are 2 completely different assessments, DIBELS 8 has the same construction, okay? So Every student who you wanted and needed to become a reader needed to reach those benchmark goals, those minimum expectations. They were not where you want your average or typical student to score. They were where you want your lowest, most struggling reader to score. That's where 100% comes from. So 100% of students should get to the minimum expectations. 100% of students should score at or above benchmark on Dibble's 8th edition. This is good feedback, because this tells me, something new, or something that's been rattling around in the back of your head just like landed, right? Yeah. So this is not like state assessment where you have a proficiency cut point or something. This is not like a norm referenced test where you set a target at like the 40th percentile. Okay? Dibble's 8th edition is a criterion reference test, and I have a slide that'll explain that a little bit further. But the idea from the origins of this model was the only screener we had at the time. 100% of students need to hit those minimum expectations. What we're doing with these tiers is making sure everybody gets to those minimum expectations, but acknowledging what it takes to get them there will vary in intensity. So the MTSS model is about systems change. It's about school improvement. It's about creating, engineering, materializing a system of increasingly intensive instructional supports that will cause every student to hit those minimum expectations. What the MTSS looks like in your district will be different than what it looks like in your district. And even in 2 different buildings in the same district, it'll look different. Perhaps in 2 different grade levels in the same school, it might look different, because it's all designed around the needs of your students. Okay, I'm going to pause and let you comment, question, clarify. Okay, tell the person next to you something that resonated because you already knew it, and something that extended your knowledge about this model. Yep, I'm going to say it about 100 times. Okay, I'm going to ask you to come back together. I should have established a good silent signal before we started, but let's see what clarification we need. We're going to go deeper into all of this throughout the afternoon. That's what it's all about. But the model was originally designed to be a systems change framework, so that within each school, within each district, you would engineer a system of increasingly intensive instructional supports that causes 100% of your students to reach those minimum expectations. Okay. This is why it's hard, right? Like, there's not just like a recipe you can take off the shelf and just implement it. And this is why it's really hard for people at the district level who like consistency. There's things you can't be consistent about. The right answer often is, it depends. Yeah. That's actually the right answer. It's not a cop-out. And at the state level, really hard, because that's where you really like consistency. And the consistent piece is contextualize the reading research for the needs of your students. Bring together what's in the research with what your students need, and create a system that causes every student to get to these goals. There was a hand somewhere in this side. Yeah.
But I think I know what you said. So what I heard you say was that MTSS is the system for getting all of our kids, to that 100% of our kids, to that minimum expectation.
Yep, it's the framework. Yep.
I love that.
My friend Judy Elliott says it's a frame, not a box. Don't get boxed into rigid, thou shalt kinds of statements, because that won't serve you well. Okay? It's a framework. It's a heuristic. even these percentages, right? It's not set in stone. If you have 79% of your students at benchmark, that's good indication of the effectiveness of your first reading instruction, right? Like, don't get hung up on the details. These are concepts that are meant to frame the way you do business in your schools, okay? So I want to continue the history lesson just a little bit, because I find myself that, you know, in implementation science, when we're trying to take things to scale, it's like a game of telephone. You've all played telephone, right? So over 30 years of trying to implement these things, some things have, you know, maybe not been communicated very clearly. And so we have to revisit some of the origins of why did we embark on this thing that you're now being tortured with called MTSS? Like, where did this harebrained scheme come up with? So here are some of the underlying assumptions, and then I'm just going to compare and contrast what should be the old way of doing business with MTSS. So here are some underlying assumptions, and don't shout out, but just think in your own head which ones of these are challenging even for you, okay? All children can learn. If they haven't learned it, you haven't taught in the right way for them to learn it. That's about ownership. That's hard. That's really hard, really, really hard. So think about the conditions that would have to be in place in your school for every educator to be willing to accept this. Think about the conditions in your school currently that work against this, okay? Those are the things we have to, like, you know, lift the rock off of and expose to the sunlight and discuss. Children are learning in schools which are complex host environments. What does that mean? The schools are filled with humans who are complicated. And I put myself in that category. Humans are complicated. If it was just about the children, that'd be one thing. But the adults in the system, and schools are systems themselves, but they exist within communities, which also are complex, but really important in terms of harvesting resources and not thinking about just like a one way from the school out kind of experience. Decisions need to be made through shared ownership with important leadership happening at all levels. This is also not easy to implement, right? Our instructional decisions need to be grounded by research whenever possible, but we don't have research on every little thing, every little move that a teacher needs to make in a classroom. So sometimes we're guided by theory, sometimes we're guided by best practice, sometimes we're guided by our own past experience, right? And when that's the case, we have to be like researchers. We have to be collecting data on our students so that we know quickly if what we're doing is not causing them to learn. We need to be able to preference what's in the research over our own beliefs, our own original training, our own biases, preferences, the theme that we always like to do in the fall, you know, the stuff that we're comfortable with, that's familiar to us. This is asking humans to change. Yeah, humans don't really like to change. We talk about liking to change, but we don't really like to change. It's hard. So we have to get the conditions right to allow the kinds of change that your students need to happen. It's not change for change's sake. It's not random change. It's change for better outcomes for students. So when we're driven by those outcomes, when that's the North Star, then we can get past more easily, not easily, but more easily get past some of these barriers. Okay, so I want you to just listen as I contrast the way things used to be when this model was first conceptualized. Why was a different way of doing business in schools even considered and put forward as a model that we now call MTSS? What were we doing that wasn't as helpful? And I want you to specifically think about, are you still doing some of these things? Are some of these things still operational in the schools that you support? Okay? So in the traditional model, the old way of serving students in schools, we used to wait to fail. We used to document failure, honestly. When I worked as a school psychologist, I always said you had to have a file this thick before anybody would pay attention to you. You had to have documentation of things that were tried and nothing worked for a period of years, perhaps. You had to be behind this much before you got any support. Because the only way to get support in the system I was in was special education. There was nothing other than, and there was a big divide between general education and special education. And if you weren't behind this much, then you weren't going to get that magic help in special ed land. You weren't getting access to it. So we did a lot of wait to fail. Now that we know even more about the power of prevention, MTSS is all about that. Primary, secondary, tertiary prevention. That's what the three-tiered model was designed to be. Okay, so we now have universal screening. It used to be, maybe I put this on here. Yeah, next one. It used to be that we had to wait until a teacher recognized a concern with a student and got concerned enough that they would say something, right? It was all dependent on the individual teacher recognizing there was a problem and it passing his or her threshold, personal threshold for tolerating it, that they would seek some help, right? Now, we don't have to wait for all of that sort of error-prone stuff to happen. We do universal screening. We know after, at most, 2 weeks, who's on track and who's potentially at risk if instruction doesn't change for them. The thing that classroom teacher used to do was refer to an intervention assistance team. Did you call them those in North Carolina? A team of people would get together. The teacher would have like a 30-minute slot, and you'd sit around and talk. What'd you call it? SST, which was what? Student support team. Okay, so cross out IAT and put in SST. That was the idea. So when I was a school psychologist, I had a sign-up sheet on my door. It was like 20-minute increments, and by March it was full for the entire school year. Well, by like the end of February, it was full for the entire school year. And teachers would come and plead their case and try to get some help for their student. And if the only tool you have is a hammer, everyone looks like a nail. And so as soon as we learned about peer tutoring, everybody got peer tutoring, no matter what they came to the SST for. Some of these stories might resonate with your own past experience. It was dependent on that team knowing the questions to ask, knowing what to look for in the student data, knowing the kinds of things that are in the research that might help with this type of situation, and having all of the infrastructure around the teacher to actually make it successful. And so it often wasn't very successful. Now, with our universal screening data, we can skip that whole SST step. We don't have to do individual student meetings until we get to Tier 3. This is one of the big innovations and efficiencies in MTSS, that we don't have to have individual student meetings until we're at Tier 3. Because individual student meetings are time intensive and resource intensive. You're bringing in like the SLP and the reading specialist and the school psych and maybe the principal and the family members and community members, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very, very intensive. We don't have to do that anymore until we're at that most intensive tier 3. One of the main reasons that the MTSS model was created was to break down these silos between general education and special education. We're not there yet. This is still a goal, a very, very explicit goal. We need to be looking at students and their needs primarily, and then looking at all of our resources, regardless of the funding source or the title or where their office is within the district building. Any resource that's available in our district, we should be able to bring it to bear on the needs of an individual student, based on what they need, not based on what funding stream they qualify for or the title of the person who's been serving them. Okay, so this idea of flexible and integrated service delivery is at the heart of MTSS. Focusing on the individual student and bringing to bear any resources that are at your disposal to support that student towards better outcomes. Obviously, we are moving away from balanced literacy towards more explicit and direct instruction. I'm going to talk a lot more about this, but short version of the story is there is no research to support a child-centered, discovery learning, constructivist, problem-based approach for beginners and strugglers in any subject area, but especially in a high-stakes like reading. There is just no evidence, and it's been studied. They call these horse race studies, where you put two methods or approaches next to each other, balanced literacy, or constructivist approaches to instruction, and direct instruction. Direct instruction wins, like not just by a nose, but by a lot every single time for beginning and struggling readers specifically. I'm going to talk more about that. We used to have a very top-down approach to supporting students. It was an expert-driven model. Experts were disconnected from the classroom. I was one of those so-called experts as a school psychologist. Everybody looked at me in the meeting, so is he in or not? Like it was my decision, is the student going to get special education support or not? And what I was doing, well, I should clarify this because I wasn't trained to do these things, but what the system expected of me was to do very high inference, norm referenced, fancy schmancy tests that were disconnected from what was going on in the classroom and come up with a set of numbers where I would pronounce yes or no, in or not in, specifically around learning disabilities and a discrepancy formula. Did they meet the magic 30-point discrepancy between IQ and achievement? So it was this very top-down, expert, high inference, disconnected from what was going on in the classroom every day with that child. In some cases, disregarding the teacher and the family's experiences. And that was the model that we were operating in. Not in MTSS. Here's where the confusion happens. Some people are still thinking we do this, what they call response to intervention. We do good direct assessment. We do problem solving in a grade level team, perhaps an individual team. And then when all of that hasn't worked, we stop and refer for an evaluation. And we still bring in the school psychologist and they do a battery of tests. I always thought that was an interesting phrase. A battery of tests. Battery's I can never say this one. Polysemous has multiple meanings. A battery of tests. Battery always made me think of hurting someone. Yeah. Which is what it felt like to do those tests. Like it was hurtful. Now we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to do that at the federal level. We don't have to do it. I'm not sure about your state, but there's flexibility there, probably more flexibility than you take advantage of. We used to pride ourselves on informing parents, just letting them know what we were doing in schools. And in MTSS, parents and community members are part of the decision-making teams at all levels, the district level, the school level, obviously about their own individual students. So parents are team members in MTSS. I want you to just think for a minute, and you can reveal to the person next to you, are there any things that I've described as part of the traditional old way of doing business that caused MTSS to be conceptualized that are still happening in the schools that you support? Go ahead and just chat with the person next to you for a minute. Yeah, very good. So making sure that some of the professional learning, some of the conversations around MTSS reach all educators in your system, not just teachers. Is your legislation around the letters training just aimed at teachers? No, administrators and other educators? Good. In some states, it's really focused on teachers. So thank you for bringing that up. The first part of what you said was still doing the teacher referral, waiting for a teacher to refer piece. Yeah, that I find that to be very common. It's like old habits are hard to break, right? So this is something to really think about and take back to the systems you support. And I'm going to give you some approaches to doing that, to using screening data today. And then I think you're talking this afternoon, tomorrow, about how to do this, using some protocols and some ways to actually do that. So that'll be helpful. Yes?
One thing that keeps coming up as like a teacher, I experience this as well. You feel like you start over, like you have a kid who struggles since they've been in first grade, but yet interventions start over every year. They gotta get another 12 weeks.
Yeah.
They gotta get this, and so the student never gets the real help that they need because you're always like gathering that first layer of data. Again, it's hard to create a system that keeps it all together in one place so that student has one journey instead of starting the same journey over and over again.
Yep, that's a really common occurrence and problem, so I'm glad that you brought that out. And good news is you have a database called M-Class. Do you still call it M-Class? You have a database where all those data live. So how easy is that? Like, one of the things I really love coming up in the spring, like this time of year, is that cross-grade articulation meeting where second grade meets with third grade and gives third grade the heads up about the kids that are coming to them so that you can hit the ground running day one of third grade. So they know what the intervention plans are, who's getting intervention, the changes that they had to make to their core instruction, et cetera, et cetera. And you've got a data system that makes that easier to happen. It's just putting that on your radar, understanding that that's part of the old system, recognizing that that's something about your system that needs to change. And that's what I'm trying to help you surface today, is because everybody in this room, when you came in, if I had said, are you doing MTSS? You'd say, yep. We've been doing it for 15 years.
Incorrect.
Maybe incorrectly, but maybe not in a way that gets you the results that you need. So I'm trying to sort of bring to the surface things that can change about the way you're doing business if your current systems, your current way of operating is not getting 100% of your kids to those benchmark goals. Okay, I'm going to specifically narrow in on some what I think are high value targets, things that you can talk about in your schools, lead people to thinking about changing. Okay, so first I want to do a little trip through the reading research. This is Stephanie's version of the most important findings in the reading research. And maybe you've heard me talk about these things before because it sounds like embarrassingly my videos have been shared through. No, I'm honored by that, but me on video is the embarrassing part of it. Because I talk about these things often, frequently, but what I want to do today is show the connection to MTSS. Like, what are the implications of these findings in the research for the way that you do business in your schools, okay? So we're going to just go through these 5. Okay, highlights what I think are the most sort of important findings in the reading research. Okay, this is not an anatomically correct version of the reading brain. It's not to scale. I'm sure I have not labeled things correctly. All you letters trainers out there, you can do it like with your fist. Like, I don't even know which fist to hold up. I don't know if it's like stage left and stage right. Like, so I have a low-level understanding of these things. But here are the big ideas. Big idea number 1, and I think it was Steven Pinker who made this statement. Reading is parasitic on language. Reading is not something that we are born to do, so to speak. Our brain is not wired for reading at birth. We don't have a network for reading when we're born. We used to think that we do. This is where a lot of those constructivist, guided reading kinds of approaches to reading instruction came from. Before we could scan people's brains, we thought reading was just like language. If you sort of put somebody in an environment of literacy, when the child is ready, it will come, right? Like it'll just, like language does. You put a child in an environment of French speakers, they will speak language. All those other phonemes fall away, right? That's not the way that reading works. So I've already mentioned one of the really important aspects of this, which is don't wait expecting something to naturally appear when the child is ready. It's not about being developmentally or constitutionally ready for reading. What makes you ready to read is having the prerequisite skills. And the number one prerequisite is language. Language will put an upper threshold on your reading ability. No matter what we do to teach the code, you only can understand in print what you understand through speech. Write that down. Now that's not me, that's Charles Perfetti's way of saying it. You only understand in print what you would understand in speech. What are the implications of that for your English learners, your multilingual learners, your dialect speakers? For every student, right? Oral language, oral language, oral language, oral language, oral language, oral language. So this means we've got to elevate all aspects of language. People talk a lot these days about structured literacy, the language structures, orthography, phonology, morphology, semantics, right? Like all of the structures of language. Give teachers ways to come at what might be going on with a student who's struggling, and all of those layers of language give teachers ways to teach the first time around in ways that are likely to build this network. So here's a big implication, especially when it comes to first reading instruction, where we don't often think about this, but also reading intervention. When we teach in ways that build the network, this three-way network, it's more likely to have a good positive payoff in outcomes in the future for students. So that three-way network is between the spoken word, so the sounds in the spoken word, the symbols, printed symbols that represent that word, and the meaning of the word. That's the one we often forget. I think as a field we're getting better at phonology and orthography, but we're often forgetting to bring in the meaning. So for example, students remember how to segment words that they know the meanings of better than segmenting nonsense words or common English words like cot, C-O-T. If you don't know what a cot is, or keg, I said that once, I was doing a workshop at Ohio University, and they all laughed, like everybody in this town knows what a keg is. But you get the point. If they know the meaning of that simple word you're teaching them to segment and blend, they are more likely to get to the segmenting and blending than if they didn't know the word. Okay? There's lots of examples. I'll sprinkle these throughout, but the idea is when you are building that three-way network in the brain, so I kind of showed it with this black, I don't know if it's still animated. I really need to get like a graphics person to help me with these slides. This three-way network, okay, is like a rut in a cow pasture. Do you have very many cows in North Carolina? We have a lot in Ohio. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Or maybe your dog does this in the backyard, like they always go to a certain spot at the fence and then, so they wear a path, right? That's what I always think of when I picture the developing reader's brain, right? Like the person who's acquiring literacy has to create these ruts so that they no longer have to decode, so that they can look at the word and instantly go to the meaning of the word. So instruction that supports that is going to be more efficient and effective than instruction that detracts from that, like takes people away from it, okay? Or takes kids' minds away from it. Do you have questions about this? Okay. Second big, very, very important finding in the reading research is that reading comprehension can be explained almost entirely through word recognition and language comprehension. This is one of the first things I learned when I went to graduate school, believe it or not. And I'm still learning about the simple view. So, anybody who thought it was simple, or maybe I'm the simple one because I'm still learning about this model. And there's been research to confirm, more than 100 research studies have confirmed that once this theory, used to be a theory, that it is in fact the case. That reading comprehension is made up of, almost entirely made up of word recognition and language comprehension. There is no third component. It's not motivation, it's not working memory, it's not attention, it's not, what are some of those other things in the active view? I can't think of. Executive function. It's not any of those things. All of those things may operate on reading, but they don't operate exclusively on reading. This is a model about reading. What does it take for reading comprehension to happen? Word recognition and language comprehension. Okay? There's no third capacity. I find this very comforting because I can hold three things in my mind, right? So for young children, you all know how this works as a math problem, right? I don't have to talk about that. Except to say, no amount of one of these capacities can make up for lacking in the other. That's the reason why it's a multiplication problem. I find this comforting because if I'm a primary teacher, I've got two jobs, language and word recognition. I don't care that there's 465 standards at the end of kindergarten, because I can collapse all of that noise into word recognition and language comprehension. Those are my guiding lights. Those are my priorities. And if I'm working in the intermediate grades, 4th through 6th grade students, and I have a student who's not understanding grade level text, I don't have to do a battery of in-depth assessments. I have to investigate what? Just those two. That's what's required. So for beginning readers, for older struggling readers, this narrows the range tremendously. Now, within each of these, they're complex. These are not single skills. These are lots of skills. We're starting to do a good job, I think, of teaching and understanding word recognition, not so much around language comprehension. It's very, very tough. We don't have good assessments. We don't have really good explicit instructional materials and routines. They're coming, but we're not there yet. So in terms of prioritizing what we're going to teach, this is where I nest the 5 essential components from the National Reading Panel. You're all familiar with. If you haven't read at least the executive summary, it should be assigned reading for every educator. Still true today, the research since it was released just confirming that these are the essential areas. These are the organizer. These are the big ideas. These are the things that should be prioritized in that place where kids spend most of their instructional minutes, Tier 1. So the implication here is prioritizing instruction around these 5 essential early literacy skills. Making sure that every student leaves kindergarten with oral language and phonemic awareness. Some kids will be able to acquire additional skills. Every student has to have skills in those 2 domains or areas, right? Is a way to think about it. So the MTSS model, all about prevention, little bit about intervention because we've got kids who are already in the pipeline as 2nd through 6th graders. I think the simple view, so I've just turned it on its side here. Hopefully the color coding helps orient you. And I'm thinking about it with young children from left to right in terms of preventing reading failure. These are the big 5, right? Preventing reading failure, going from left to right, and intervening with older struggling readers, working it from right to left. This is like the mall map to me. You go into nice giant, what's your biggest mall here in North Carolina? You have a nice big mall? No? So you travel to Minnesota and you go to the Mall of America. And you've never been there before. You don't know where Sephora is. So you go to that big display, you know, and there's that red dot. It's usually a red dot. There's that red dot. You are here. That's what I think of. This is the schema or heuristic that I have in my mind whenever I'm working with students, whenever I'm working with school systems. Because I want to drop a pin. You are here. Right? This is what assessment should do for you. It should drop a pin. You are here. You are here. Oh no, you're here. Right? It should tell you for every student, where is your system? Where does your system need to focus and prioritize? And for each individual student, where are they on this progression of skills? This is obviously an oversimplification, but I think we need some of these like graphic organizers to help us narrow the range on the complexity. And that's what the research can do for us, is help us focus in, crowd out all the noise, focus in. These are the big chunks of things that we should be focusing time and attention on, is the idea. Okay, now, here's the biggie. This is what I think is the most important finding in the reading research. And I often say this is what's tattooed on the inside of my eyelids. This is why I get up in the morning and go out and flail myself against the system, trying to help people understand this particular concept. And we've known this since the 80s. This is, again, one of the things that I learned in my graduate program. Once a student leaves first grade as a struggling reader, they don't tend to catch up. This got my attention. I was intending to be a school psychologist focused on mental health with high school students. That's why I went to graduate school. But I was working in a Head Start program where I saw all the family engagement, all the early intervention, all the language opportunities, all the prevention. And then I also worked in a K-8 elementary school where your file had to be this big before anybody would talk about you. And it was that cognitive dissonance that got me paying attention to reading, because in those SST meetings that I would sit in day after day after day after day, you know what? Everybody had a reading concern. It looked like behavior, but it was reading. It looked like math, but it was reading, right? So I had to go, something to this. And here was the experience. You may have experienced this as well. So I'm going to give you the bad news first, and then I'm going to give you the good news. This point in time at the end of first grade is a dividing line. What do you see happening here? So this is typical readers, not even top readers. This is struggling readers on something like words, well, on words correct per minute. Comprehension indicator. What do you notice? What's happening there at end of first grade? Two lines form, two groups form. Do they smudge together later on? No. They're very, very distinct groups. What happens across time as they go into second grade and beyond? They get farther and farther apart. The difference between the two groups gets bigger over time. It's not the common experience for students to catch up. Now, everybody's thinking, I know a kid who, like maybe your own child, maybe somebody you worked with, that had that sort of light bulb experience in fourth grade. It all kind of, clicked, fell in place for them, and they caught up. It definitely can happen, but when we talk about large populations of students, the common experience is not to catch up. That is a unique experience if students catch up at a later point in time. They will make incremental progress. So from a special education perspective, This was what I was seeing, like at the annual review, you'd look back for that individual. Yeah, they're doing better than they were last year. But before we had universal screening, we didn't often measure them against the sort of grade level expectation. So we didn't have that reference point to check in. Have they closed the gap? Have they caught up? So the gap starts very early. We have lots of laws in this country about third grade retention, third grade guarantee, third grade accountability. Third grade's not soon enough. Third grade is not soon enough. And when we put the accountability there, that's where the resources go. That's where the time and attention goes, right? So we need to help people shift that conversation. Okay? Now, here's, I think I gave all the bad news. I was just making sure before I give you the good news. Like, it makes you sweat, doesn't it? Like, yeah, especially anybody have their own child in kindergarten or first grade? Like, yeah, this raises your anxiety tremendously. It did mine, I can tell you that. When my kids were little, yeah, this was top of mind every day. Now, the good news is we actually have the technology to prevent the reading problem from happening in the first place. We now know what to assess in KM1. We know how to assess those things. We know what to teach when students don't have those things. And we even know how much of those things kids need to have to be on the green line versus the red line. So good news, there's a lot we can do right here in KM1. Now, we also know how to catch kids up if they're struggling at later points in time, but that is not easy. That is extremely difficult. The research on intervening with older struggling readers suggests something like an hour to an hour and a half of reading intervention every single day, in addition to the regular ELA block. How many of your schools, raise your hand if you have an hour and a half of reading intervention every day at the secondary level? Right. I ask that question all around the country. It's not that we can't do it, we aren't doing it. So if you want to implement MTSS in a secondary setting, you can, but you're going to have a system that allows for intensive, extremely intensive support. That's what it takes to catch kids up, and that's not the way we typically do business. Okay? What we do in kindergarten and first grade can change the outcome. It can change the future for students. That's the business that we need to be focused on, in my opinion. Now, some smarter people with more energy than me are going to focus on this intervention stuff, and God bless you, please go ahead. That's just not going to be me. I'm going to focus on the prevention part in KM1, where it's easier, less time intensive. They're shorter than you are, the kids, you know, all those good things. They're really fun to work with. Now, what do you notice about the red and green lines in KM1? They're together. You don't know who's going to be a reader and who's not going to be a reader. But you do. Aha. Remember? Oh, and I'm not going to, oh yeah, there it is. You do. You actually do know those prerequisites to reading text accurately, fluently, and for meaning. It includes oral language, it includes phonics, it includes phonemic awareness. This is the great innovation in assessment, in my opinion. This is what caused me to go work for the authors of Acadians, used to be called Dibbles, in 2008, because I had used their assessment to implement MTSS and change in many different schools from 30% of students on track to 80 or 90% of students on track by what happened in kindergarten and first grade, by screening all students 3 times a year on these key indicators, these essential early literacy skills, indicators of the essential early literacy skills, so that you don't wait until the end of first grade to find out, oops, this one didn't make it. You know from the beginning of kindergarten who's on track for green and who's on track for red. What is the PSF score at the beginning of K? Because you use Dibbles 8, so I don't have these committed to memory. Nobody knows. This is your homework tonight. Go find out what the PSF score and NWF score at the beginning of kindergarten and first grade are. Because every student who's not at those numbers is in trouble.
It's 8.
8 for PSF at the beginning of K. Yeah, you don't have to have this stuff committed to memory. You just need to know where to look. That's what the smart educators do. Just need to know where to look. But my point is, we don't have to wait anymore until the reading problem manifests itself. In fact, it's too late once it's a reading problem. It's too dramatic. It's too hard to turn it around once it's a reading problem. Our systems are not organized to make that happen. Okay? So instead of that, we can focus on preventing the problem from happening in the first place. This is what we do through a 3-tiered model. You've got the assessments. You know exactly how much students need to have of these essential skills. You can do business differently in kindergarten and first grade to get a different outcome at the end of first grade. It's possible for almost every student to read at the end of first grade based on how you do business in K and 1. It may be very difficult, but it's possible. And I'm saying almost every student because I don't think we've figured out quite yet how to do this for students with very significant cognitive and sensory impairments. But everybody else, we've figured out how to get them to be readers. It is perhaps going to take doing business very differently than the way your school currently operates. You can't just keep on doing things like, hamster on the wheel, this is the way we've always done it, and expect a different result. This is what the MTSS model is primarily about. What do your students need? Engineer a system to make that happen for them. And I would suggest the priority, emphasis, and conversation is in kindergarten and first grade. You have questions about this? What looked scary, but now I hope feels hopeful and optimistic because you can make it happen. Oh, that's all the stuff that I said. Okay. So you've got it. You've got it written down, summarized. I alluded to this earlier, and we're going to unpack this later on this afternoon. But there is just no evidence against explicit, direct, and systematic instruction, especially for any skill that is new, any skill that a student might be struggling with, or when a student doesn't have a lot of background knowledge in an area. So this is true beyond just reading and beyond just early literacy. Direct and explicit instruction matched to the skill on that MAL map, right, matched to the skill that the student needs to learn next is the best approach for beginning and struggling readers. I'm going to talk in a little bit about the instructional hierarchy, but this is just sort of a preview in terms of one of the biggest findings in the research that we are still fighting about. You think about the reading wars. I think this is the front line of the reading wars. Between people who think that it's preferable to have students engaged in constructing and discovering information for themselves all the time in all subject areas, and people who think that we should be directly front-loading and supporting students to come to the right answer when they are beginners, and then fade that scaffolded support as they become more expert. So guess which camp I'm in? Yeah, the second one. Because I've read the research. Because I've lived in education for 30 plus years. I've seen the results. The problem I think that has caused this misunderstanding to persist is that teachers will, first of all, it can seem more enjoyable to the teacher and the children to teach in a way that is more of a discovery learning or a problem-based learning or a child-centered and directed approach. It can seem preferable, right? I get that. It just doesn't work as well for beginners and older struggling students. It doesn't work as well for beginners or strugglers in any area, at any age, okay, any skill. Think about, how many of you have taught your children to drive a car? Oh, yeah, it's like not a good memory for some of us. So you could have taken your 15-year-old and put them behind the wheel of your vehicle on the interstate. And through trial and error and some immediate corrective feedback offered by the other motorists, they might have learned to drive the car correctly and successfully. They could have, right? I think that's what happens sometimes in schools. Like, we might have this preference for these more child-centered approaches, and so that's what we do. Maybe that's what we were supported in our teacher prep program. You know what? Some kids figure it out. Just like some 15, 16-year-olds behind the wheel of the car would figure it out, right? But the problem is not everybody figures it out. Not everybody, not even close to everybody, becomes a reader through that approach. And tragically, some don't, and then we get the red and green lines, right? And the consequences of that are not things that I need to bring to your attention because you already know. So I think those are the reasons why this has persisted in spite of 50 years of evidence to the contrary. Like, it feels better to you, this other balanced approach. It feels good. It might, sort of match your worldview or your preferences. And it actually works for a little handful of kids, so you persist in it. And over time, you think, well, I'm teaching the way that I've been told to teach. I'm using materials that are lined up this way. I've gone to all the workshops that have supported me to teach in that way, and it's working for some. So you think, it must not be me or my instruction, it must be the kids. And that's a feedback loop that's very, very problematic. It's like a survival mechanism because you're working hard. Every classroom teacher is working hard. They are trying their best. They want their children to be readers. And so the sort of human nature response, you're working hard, doing what you've been told to do. It's not working. It's understandable to think that's the children. They must have a disability, right? Or worse, right? So I think that's why this has perpetuated and why we haven't been able to get ourselves out of this in spite of 50 years of evidence to the contrary. So this is the moment, folks. This is the moment. This is at least the second big wave of this interest in reading research that I've lived through in my lifetime. And I think the stars are lined up much better for us now than they were in Reading First. And so this is the time to bring these things to people's attention. These are tough conversations to have, but really, really important conversations to have so that people understand their own stuff that they're bringing to these conversations, and they can become open to what's actually in the research. So this brings us back to the MTSS model as the framework for implementing what's in the reading research. This is not something separate from the science of reading. This is the delivery mechanism for the science of reading. This is how we transfer and put in place what's in the reading research to the benefit of every student. So even within your own Department of Education, I'm just going to put a little bug in the ears of those of you here. Bring down the silos. Kelly talked about how you're collaborating across silos. Think about bringing them down. Think about renaming your departments. Think about this in your school districts. Do you have a Department of Curriculum and Instruction and a Department of Exceptional Learning or Special Education or Title I or federal programs or on and on and on and on, right? you're all working towards the same outcome. You're all working towards the same outcome for students. Literacy is at the heart of everything we do in education. So if you can bring down those walls and barriers and come together towards that same common purpose, then we can do more faster. So I'm going to leave you with that for a break, something to chew on and chat about and think about while we take a break. So we talked about 5 aspects of the reading research that I think are really critically important, that are the priorities, especially around early literacy, things that we can elevate as we're planning our multi-tiered systems of support. The 5th one being MTSS as the framework for implementing what's in the reading research. So I'm going to shift gears now, and I'm going to talk about the structures and systems for building that MTSS. So what are the things, in my experience, that help districts improve their reading outcomes? What are the aspects of MTSS that are at the base of that triangle, the base of that cone? What are the systems that are things you can manipulate, change, engineer to get a different result? Okay, and I was really happy to see that my list overlaps with your state's list of things to attend to. So I'm just going to draw a connection here for you. So tiered instruction, everybody talks about tiered instruction when they talk MTSS, but sometimes people leave it there. That's all they talk about. That's all they think it is, right? And we know there's more to it. And to get a tiered system in place, you have to have good assessment data. So we're going to unpack that. You have it as data and evaluation in your model, in your state. I was really happy to see what I lumped together as teaming, leadership, and collaborative problem solving shows up in 3 different aspects of your model, which is fantastic to have that much emphasis on those important components. And then professional knowledge, coaching, professional learning, professional development. So educator knowledge is an additional component. And that, I think, connects to what you have as building capacity. It's part of the infrastructure, is that human capital, that knowledge of educators. So I'm going to just use that as an organizer to talk through these aspects of your system that, again, hopefully will get you to surface and unpack the way that you're currently doing business that could be changed to get a different result for your students. So you are here as individuals who are supporting systems. You obviously would have to take this information back to the people that you work with and work to influence their ways of doing business and ways of operating. In my experience, there's lots of confusion even just around the tiered model. So I know you know the 3 tiers. I know that you could list characteristics and aspects of each of the tiers. But in my conversations with people all around the country, there's a lot of confusion. So I just want to highlight what I experience as some confusions to see if this is helpful to you, if this connects. So one of the really, really important aspects of Tier 1 core reading instruction is that it should be engineered and designed to meet the needs of all students. All students. This is one of the reasons why you do universal screening, why you don't just let kids who are struggling bubble up to the teacher's attention. The most important use of universal screening is to identify what do students at this grade level need, so that Tier 1 instruction can be designed to meet those needs. The reason to do universal screening is to design classroom reading instruction for the grade level. That's the reason to do it. We've lost track of that. Every student is a Tier 1 student. You know how you have certain things that just like get under your skin and people say, that's like fingernails on the chalkboard, which now is a very outdated term. Nobody would know what you're saying when you say fingernails on the chalkboard, because we don't have chalkboards anymore. But one of the things that gets me all twitchy is when we use the terms to talk about students. We say tier 1 students, tier 2 students, tier 3 students. And the easiest way to counteract that is to start using those terms about the teachers. You're a tier 3 teacher. See, you don't even have to have a definition and you know that's a negative, right? So nobody wants to be the tier 3 teacher, so don't call the children by those terms. Those terms are for the instruction. They are not descriptions of students. They are descriptions of instruction. You don't have tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 students, or even worse, red, yellow, and green students. You don't have red, yellow, and green students. You have red, yellow, and green instruction. You have tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 systems of support. Okay, so feel free to tweak people's language on that. The purpose of core reading instruction is to prevent reading failure. People have lost sight of this. They don't talk about this way. And I'm going to bring this up in a couple of different ways so that it will be cemented for you. Just like flu prevention, this is the instruction that's universal. This is what we're doing for everyone. So this is the place where students spend most of their instructional minutes, honestly, is in classroom reading instruction. That makes it the best opportunity to meet the needs of the students. It's a much better opportunity than any kind of intervention block or time in the day. You have more minutes within that tier 1 instructional time. How many minutes should be devoted to tier 1 instruction depends on the needs of the students in that grade level. You will know if you need 60 minutes or you need 150 minutes based on your universal screening data. This is perhaps something you'll be talking about tomorrow. People miss this, okay? The primary use of universal screening data is to inform what should tier 1 instruction look like, and that includes the number of minutes. So from the district level, from the state level, we like to have these blanket mandates. Thou shalt have 120 minutes of tier 1. Well, maybe you could get the job done in 90 minutes. Maybe you need 150 minutes because of the needs of your students. This is a data-based decision informed by universal screening. It might be different at every grade level within a school. So the district should not necessarily mandate, in my opinion, a blanket statement about the number of minutes. You might have like a minimum that you want to mandate, but the exact number of minutes depends on the needs of the students. What you're doing during that time is just as important, if not more important, than the number of minutes that you have, and we'll talk about some of those structures. A place where people go astray is thinking that when we say all students get tier 1 instruction, that means it's all whole group, or that everyone gets the same thing. You can do what you want, but that's not MTSS. That's not the way the model was designed, and I would suggest it's probably not going to work for you. Kids come in even day 1 of kindergarten with a wide range of skills, more so every year, right? So you can't expect a one-size-fits-all. Again, the best use of universal screening data is to engineer and design what should tier 1 instruction look like in this grade level. And if you are not increasing your students who are on track, reducing the number of students who are at risk with the first way you teach reading, then this is something that you probably need to consider. Maybe the format, the grouping format, the fact that you've been teaching all whole group, that's something that can be changed. It's something you should consider if you want a different result. But by design, the model, again, based in research when this was first conceptualized, is highly differentiated. Some things taught in whole group, some things taught in small group. We all know kids are going to learn better and faster in small groups than they will in whole group. I'm talking about adult-led small groups, not kids working together, like independently. So adult-led, targeted, flexible, not talking about tracking, you're in this group all day or all year. Nope, it's flexible, skill-based, small groups, okay? Planned using your screening data. And here's the real kicker. You know if what you're doing in Tier 1 is working, if it causes the vast majority of students to reach those DIBELS 8 benchmark goals. And those benchmark goals are what, everyone? The minimum. They're the lowest expectation. 100% of students should reach those DIBELS 8 benchmark goals. That's how they're designed. They're designed to be the lowest level of okay performance. If we're going to get 100% of students to those goals, we better have a very small number of students who are at risk, because we cannot provide the kind of intensive support that some students need to very many kids. This is why it's shaped like a triangle. It's not upside down, it's not a cone, it's not a circle, it's not an oval, it's not star-shaped. It's shaped this way on purpose. What we do in the place where kids spend most of their instructional minutes, regular classroom reading instruction, has the job of preventing reading failure, of reducing risk, of getting the vast majority of students on track with the first way we teach reading. If we want 100% of students to meet those expectations, the first way we teach reading in Tier 1 has to be so lined up to what kids in that grade level need that it causes 80% or roughly 80% of kids just Tier 1, no intervention. That's the other thing people don't understand. Just Tier 1 alone should get the vast majority of students to those minimum expectations. Some people think 80% of students should get to benchmark, 15% should score below benchmark, and 5% should score well below benchmark. That's a common misunderstanding about the model. So just to put a fine point on that and clarify, 100% of students get to the benchmark goals. What it takes to get them there, now I don't have my cone picture anymore, what it takes to get them there will vary in intensity. You might be sitting at, I don't know, 46% of your kids at benchmark, or 65% of your kids at benchmark. If you're going to get to 100%, right, every student gets to those minimum expectations, you can't achieve that through an intervention system, because intervention is hard and expensive and not as likely to work as prevention, right? So if you have more than 20% of your students who are at risk, your intervention system will quickly become overwhelmed. Whatever you call Tier 2 will get diluted, thinned, weakened, to the point where it can't do its job. And more on its job in a minute. But the intervention system can't catch kids up if there are too many kids who need it. It gets overwhelmed, right? So systems. I don't have Tier 2 kids, I have a Tier 2 system of support, okay? Okay, those are the big ideas. The last piece of this is what I think you're talking about tomorrow, which is the planning that needs to happen. So some of you are sitting here thinking, how would I possibly get the people I support to start talking about things this way or thinking this way? The mechanism for building that effective Tier 1 is a grade level team meeting or a school leadership team meeting. So if you have a very small school, like 1 or 2 sections per grade level, a school leadership team would be the place to make this happen. If you have a larger building, a grade level team would be the place to make this happen. So this is the most important thing to do after universal screening, at least 3 times a year, to sit down as a grade level team and look at not individual students who are red and yellow, no, who scored below or well below benchmark, but to talk about the percentage of students who scored below and well below benchmark. The most important action that you can take in a school, in my opinion, to sit down as a grade level team, look at the percentage of students who scored below and well below benchmark. So aggregating the results, and you don't even have to do the math. You've got the data system that feeds it up to you, which is fantastic. Talking about what does this mean for our classroom reading instruction. So here's where people are going astray. They're screening and they're only talking about individual students. And what we learned way back when I worked as a school psychologist is that student by student approach, problem solving one kid at a time, having a sign up sheet for the SST meeting, one kid at a time, doesn't cut it unless you have very few students who are at risk, which is nowhere I've ever worked, at the beginning anyway. You can't turn the system around, you can't get a different result if you don't attend to classroom reading instruction. It's the base of that cone, okay? That's where the action is. That's where you can get the most opportunity for change. So grade level teams sit down with the percentage of students who are at risk. 50% in this particular system of first graders, I think this was first grade. Second, thank you. Grade 2, it says right there. You're paying attention, very good. 50% of the second graders, and I would say this is not highly unusual. This is pretty common around the country. 50% of the second graders have met the minimum expectations. Can we intervene with half of the second graders? Is this exactly what you're trying to do? Yeah. You're not alone. That's what's happening all around the country. It's a misunderstanding of MTSS. It's a missed opportunity in our dyslexia legislation, our reading improvement legislation, where we have taken the approach one student at a time. Find a student who's at risk, write a letter to their parents, give them an intervention, monitor their progress. Can you do that with half of the second graders? Well, you could, but would it actually work? Because wait till we talk about the characteristics of tier 2 and tier 3. Like, that's hard stuff. You might be able to muster up all your oomph to do it for a year or two, but that can't be sustained. It just can't be sustained for half of the grade level. And yet this is the approach that folks are taking. We've got to leverage MTSS as the framework for improving reading outcomes, delivering the science of reading. And this is the most important act, coming together as a grade level team, not to talk about Johnny and every individual Johnny whose score is below and well below benchmark, but to talk about the percentage of students at this grade level who are at risk. You can start with this composite score, because that's the high level, Houston, we have a problem kind of indicator. Like, just you're flying over Greensboro at 10,000 feet and you're looking down, there's a forest fire, and you're like, somebody ought to do something about that down there. That's what the composite is. You're in an airplane at 10,000 feet, and there's a forest fire down there. That's not all that helpful. You can't really do much about that. You've got to go beyond the composite to those individual measures. That's where the action is. That's what you use for the on-the-ground, in the classroom decision making. And that path to reading, that mall map with the sequence of skills, that's what the grade level team needs to consider. So what's the first skill that students have to acquire on the path to reading? What do you know from the science of reading? Oral language and phonemic awareness. Now, the field has not evolved enough to have good screening and progress monitoring tools for oral language. We're working on it. Cubed from Language Dynamics is my front runner that I'm keeping my eye on. I don't think it's ready for prime time, but it's looking very, very promising. But we do have phonemic awareness indicators. So Do we have that in second grade? No. Okay, so what's the next step next skill that students have to acquire on their path to reading? That letter sound relationship, basic phonics, the alphabetic principle. Yep. Do I have an indicator of that at the beginning of second grade? Yep, that's the nonsense word scores, right? So if I want to influence change on second grade standards around reading comprehension, it all starts here. The proportion of students who are below and well below benchmark, or you could think about it the other way around, the proportion who are on track. So that's about 52% of the second graders won't understand grade level text that they read independently because they can't match sound to symbol. This is what I would say during a second grade meeting, right? Here we are. We have standards that say you should read on your own and you should be able to talk about it and you should be able to write about it and you should, all that good stuff that we want them to do. And yet here we are in Reelsville, 51% of our current second graders can't match sound to symbol. What's the reason? What are the only possibilities of why somebody has a reading comprehension problem? It could be word recognition, or it could be language comprehension, or it could be both, right? I've got a really glaring red flag right here that says half of my second graders can't understand what they read because they can't match sound to symbol. Could they also have difficulty with phonemic awareness? Possibly. If they were first graders with us last year, I might have data on that. If they weren't, I could give them PSF. Okay? This is the conversation for the grade level team. We have a curriculum, we have standards, we have a scope and sequence that assumes our second graders have come in with these prerequisites. That's a quandary, right? If we keep teaching second grade curriculum standards, out of the box, how is it going to impact half of our second graders? Are they going to be able to engage and connect and get something from that? No. So what needs to happen? Send half of the second graders to Tier 2 intervention? We've got to change the core. We've got to adapt, customize, flex, change core instruction to meet the reality. We just spent 2 weeks collecting these data. It was not nothing. This was time-consuming, expensive, time away from instruction, and so forth. The best use of those data is to customize first reading instruction in the regular classroom to meet the needs that we've just uncovered during screening. We spent all that time to collect it. We should maximize that opportunity and use it to inform what we're doing in Tier 1. What are the high-value things that you could talk about changing about Tier 1? What are the things that you could guide people through in this exact conversation? You're in a grade level team meeting looking at something like this. What should you consider changing? How can you support the classroom teacher to make those changes? Okay, so coming soon, I promise. Other questions, comments? Okay, now this is where things get tough. So here's the Tier 2 system of support is designed for some students, the few who are still not at grade level expectations in spite of effective Tier 1 instruction. Okay? For some students, not all students get Tier 2. The purpose of Tier 2 intervention is to accelerate learning and catch students up. We've lost sight of that. People forget that. The purpose of Tier 2 is to accelerate learning. So these characteristics of Tier 2 need to be in place. Like, you have to have enough dosage, enough time in the day. You have to have a small enough group to get enough opportunities for students to respond and practice. You have to have explicit and systematic instruction that's supportive of students who are struggling. The groups have to be flexible across the year. They have to be fluid. You're going to have to do more frequent progress monitoring because now you're giving more resources. Okay, so you're doing something different, something additional. You're outputting as a system more resource for these students. You need more frequent feedback. Is your output of resource actually working for the students? So that's the reason for more frequent progress monitoring. It's not a compliance activity. It's because you need to know quickly if your instruction is working, if your intervention is working to catch students up. Now, here are some things that people confuse about Tier 2. I already mentioned one. Some people think kids come out of Tier 1 to get their intervention. Tier 1 is a system of support. It's a block in the schedule, and we'll look at some examples. Everybody gets Tier 1. Some kids need support to get their Tier 1, okay? Tier 2 is an extra dose. So I didn't extend my flu prevention analogy, but I will now. So if washing hands, taking vitamins, staying home when you're sick, coughing into your elbow is primary prevention of the flu, what's secondary for people who are at risk, like us who work with the snotty-nosed? You can get a flu shot, right? So elevated risk, you get something more. You get the flu shot. Now, when you get the flu shot, do you then let people sneeze on you? No. It's not instead of. The flu shot doesn't mean stop washing your hands, okay? It's in addition to. Same as Tier 2 is in addition to Tier 1. Secondary prevention is not instead of the primary prevention. It's in addition to. So highly differentiated, customized Tier 1 system. Some kids need an extra dose at another time of day, and I'll show you how that can look in a couple schedules. Now, here's the other innovation that people miss. Tier 2 system of support is planned by the grade level team. Remember I said one of the great innovations and efficiencies in MTSS, we don't have to get together with an individual student group, a group that forms around an individual student until we get to, because that's very, very intensive to do. When we have universal screening data, we have what we need. We have what we need to plan what our Tier 2 system should look like. And I'm going to go back to the image of the data and talk a little bit more about that in a minute. You don't have to wait for a kid to bubble up as needing intervention, like a teacher to recognize it. You don't have to have a team meeting about an individual student. As soon as you're finished with your screening data, you've got the information that can inform how should your Tier 1 change and what kind of instruction, intervention do you need at Tier 2 for this grade level. You know it from the screening. Maybe you also, in some grade levels, definitely need diagnostic assessment as well, and we'll talk more about that. But this can be planned by the grade level team, or if you have a small school, the building leadership team. Okay, another really, really important use of the screening data. Okay, so now here's one of the things that I see that people are getting really invested in that I don't experience to be very effective for kids. Okay, this is my definition of MTSS. Find out what students need, give them what they need in Tier 1, intensify support as needed. Okay, I see a lot of school systems moving to an approach of win time. Is this familiar in? Okay. See, it's like wildfire catching all around the country. Okay, so well-intentioned, right? Well-intentioned is the idea that I'm going to give every student what they need. So it's what I need time, win time, right? And schools are turning their triangle into a cylinder. You're not supposed to give extra, more intensive intervention to everybody, but that's what people are doing. So they're building in this layer in their day, which is not easy to do. They're building in this layer in their day of, like, let's say a 30-minute block where kids are getting instruction in small groups that's targeted to their skill level. Does this match what you call win? And it's like all hands on deck. Everybody in the system is, flooding that grade level to provide this small group instruction. And here sits Tier 1. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. That's the Talking Heads reference. Same as it ever was. The mistake that people are making is they're expecting this 30 minutes of targeted small group intervention to make up for sitting through 90 minutes of whole group instruction that's over the heads of, in my second grade example, half the grade. And guess what? It doesn't really work. It might work for a couple of kids who just needed a little bit of something extra or different, but it's not going to get you to 100% of your students. I've not experienced it. If you're getting 100% through this approach, I want to hear about it because I'll stop bad-mouthing it. I've just never seen it work. Now, again, very, very good intentioned. People are working hard to make this happen. They're doing something in the name of MTSS that is not the model. They're running themselves ragged trying to do this, right? Because what this does, now I'm just being snarky, I'm going to call Tier 1 the widen time. If this is win time, Tier 2, Tier 1 becomes widen time. It's going to widen the gap. What I don't even need is happening in 90 minutes. And what I need is, like when I say it in a snarky way, it's like, oh, geez, yeah, we're doing that. Yeah. Like it gets people's attention. I don't mean to be disrespectful. As I said, this is with the best of intentions that people are moving this direction. They want the outcomes for kids to change. I'm trying to save you from doing things, spending time and energy on things that are not going to get you where you need to be for your kids. This is a very, very common mistake. The way the model is designed is kids get what they need in Tier 1, and some kids get another dose of what they need in Tier 2. Way back in the 90s, Joe Torgeson demonstrated that we can prevent reading failure with almost every student. We can close the gap in KM1 so that almost every student is reading by the end of first grade through this sort of double dose approach. But the first dose has to be lined up to what kids need so that it shrinks the number of students who need the double dose. Okay? That's the MTSS model. The double dose is really, really important. Students who are struggling need more and better instruction. Students who are at risk of not becoming readers at the end of first grade need more and better instruction. They too can reach the DIBELS 8 benchmark goals, but not with the same kind or amount of instruction that students who are not challenged or at risk or struggling need. Does that make sense? Okay, the double dose is really important. It's not get a flu shot and let people sneeze on you. That's the funny way to remember it. Now, here's another graphic to illustrate what this is about. And I realize it's small, so I'm going to try to talk you through it. Is it really 224? Yeah. Here's the concept. Let's say beginning of second grade, we have two students. Student A, on track, everything's at or above benchmark. They're ready for whatever lesson you are supposed to do at the beginning of second grade. I'm going to call it lesson 20. But you have student B also, half of your grade level is student B's, who do not have the prerequisites for lesson 20. What lines up to their skill is, let's say, lesson 1 in some kind of scope and sequence, okay? If I provide student B with a double dose, they get lesson 1 during core instruction and lesson 2 at another time of the same day as intervention, Tier 2. And second day of the school year, they get lesson 3 in Tier 1 and lesson 4 as Tier 2, intervention. And the third day, they get lesson 5 in Tier 1 and lesson 6 in Tier 2. The model is shaped like a triangle or a pyramid because it's about stacking learning opportunities within the school day. If we extend the learning opportunities across time, we get those two lines that grow farther and farther apart. So the alternative is to stack the additional time and instructional units, so to speak, within the school day. By the end of 20 days, both students will be on lesson 39. Now, this is a conceptual model, okay? Like, this might work in kindergarten. In second grade, it's going to take more than 20 days, right? It might take the whole school year. It might take 2 school years, right? So it's a concept. Stacking the instructional opportunities within the school day. Okay? That's what the tiered model is about. Questions, thoughts, comments? The big idea here is use screening data to design and engineer a tier 1 system that reduces risk, that causes the vast majority, something like 80%, of students to reach those minimum expectations. Design the system that your students need. That's what the screening data should be used for. They tell you exactly what your students need. Use it to design effective tier 1, and then also plan what your tier 2 should look like. So we know we use this 80% sort of criteria to evaluate the effectiveness of tier 1 instruction. And people are at least used to talking about that, hearing about that. Even if we don't always act on that, at least that's kind of in people's, realm of experience. We don't as often talk about evaluating the effectiveness of tier 2. And so this is something that I want to bring to your attention. This is it's the only image that I could find quickly. I need to replace it. You guys can help me find something with a M-class image of small group instruction. Okay? Here's just quickly what you're looking at. 4 students, all kind of struggling at the beginning of the year. They are in the same small group, getting tier 2 intervention. Maybe it's tier 2 intervention, small group. Over time, 3 of the 4 students really start to take off. Each color is a different student. But this student is not taking off. Okay? This is one way to show effectiveness of the tier 2 instruction. If nobody is catching up with your tier 2 system, it would be hard to say that it's effective. It would be hard to say that any individual who's getting that tier 2 needs tier 3 or needs a special education referral. So just as we evaluate the effectiveness of the tier 1 system, we can and should use student data to evaluate the effectiveness of the tier 2 system. So this is one way to do it. The kids who are in the small group intervention together, look at their progress monitoring data. Like, you could put different graphs for these 4 kids next to each other. It doesn't have to all be on the same graph. But the point is, as a grade level, you're going to sit down and you're going to talk about, is anybody catching up with the tier 2 intervention that we're providing to this grade level? This is a question I don't hear people asking. I hear people saying, this kid isn't growing, and this is one that really is the fingernails on the chalkboard for me. They're not responding to instruction. This is a non-responder. I take offense to that. If somebody called my child a non-responder, no. It's our responsibility to get instruction right for kids. It's not their fault if they don't catch up, if they don't make progress. We have not found the instruction yet. And maybe our tier 2 system is not working for anybody. I mean, that's possible, right? And so we can unpack and analyze why that might be happening and how to improve it, which we will do. Now, somebody asked me at the break, one of those questions that the answer is, it depends, which is, do kids get tier 2 and tier 3? And in my graphic of the 3-tiered model, you see a lot of orange in that zone, because I don't really care if you call it tier 2 or tier 3. I'm not really a stickler about this is tier 2 and this is tier 3. It's a permeable barrier to me. The way that Tier 3 is different from Tier 2 is along variables of intensity, which means more time, smaller group, more highly skilled instructor, more frequent progress monitoring, more individualized incentives, right? Those are the things that make Tier 3 more intensive than Tier 2. It is not necessarily a different program. In fact, it's very, very difficult for students who are struggling to have 3 different instructional programs in their school day. I mean, if you just lined those things up, you'd see a better result for your kids. If you have something good that you're using to differentiate Tier 1, if you also use that at Tier 2 or 3, they get a second dose of that good thing, that's much more likely to be useful and helpful to your students. This is the point in time, though, when we've had effective Tier 1, we've got an effective Tier 2 system in place, it's working for most students, but not a few individuals, a very small number. That's when we convene individual student meetings. We do problem solving, no longer just at the systems level. That's what we've been doing prior, the grade level team meetings, the building leadership team meetings. Now we're going to do problem solving about individual students. Okay, very, very time intensive. That's kind of, for me, what differentiates Tier 2 and Tier 3. Okay, how do we make this all happen? How do we, what data sources do we use to have these important conversations to design the systems that are lined up to what our students need? In an MTSS model, you're asking and answering 4 questions. You're asking questions about which students and systems are at risk. That's a screening question. You're asking and answering questions about what exactly should we teach next. That's a diagnostic question. And these are 2 separate questions. And because all assessment is designed to answer questions, because they're 2 different questions, you can't use the same tool for both purposes. So like if there's a Venn diagram of screening and diagnostic, they do not overlap at all. Screening and diagnostic are different tools. Okay? You also need to ask the formative assessment question in real time, is my instruction working? That's progress monitoring. And progress monitoring does have some overlap with screening. And you're lucky that you have DIBELS 8 because it serves both purposes. It's designed, the alternate forms for progress monitoring are designed for answering the progress monitoring question. So you don't have to learn 2 different assessments, one for screening, one for progress monitoring. You have the efficiency of using the same one for both questions. And then you need the summative question to answer, did my instruction work? Looking back at the end of the year. This is often an achievement test. It's something like your state, what do you call them, end of grade exams. Did they achieve the outcomes, the standards for this grade level? Everybody's familiar with those. It's the other 3 that we tend to need a little support about using. So let me just give some descriptors of each of these purposes of assessment, the tools that you would use. You already have good tools, so now it's just refining how are you going to use those tools specifically in an MTSS model. And why did your state choose the one that they did? How is that going to be useful? So I think about universal screening as the check engine light on your dashboard. Like, Mayday, Mayday, we have a problem. It doesn't tell you, well, now the cars actually do. If it's a flat tire or you need your oil changed, actually they're so smart now, they do tell you that. But it's a general warning, early warning system is the idea. Generally, there's something wrong in this car's system. It doesn't tell you exactly what it is. Often, that's how universal screening works, okay? Characteristics of universal screening, how they're designed, why you have such a good one, include that they have to be given to all students, therefore they must be brief. You shouldn't take any more time away from instruction than you absolutely have to gather the information you need to make screening decisions, which is answering which students and systems are at risk. So individual scores tell you the students at risk. The percentage below and well below benchmark tells you the systems that are at risk. Is it your tier 1 system? Is it your tier 2 system? Is it both? Right? If it's more than 20%, it's both. Okay? You want screeners that are standardized, which is not the same as norm referenced. More on that in a minute. But standardized meaning everybody has the same testing experience so that you can compare student A to student Z, and you can compare everybody to that benchmark goal. You want tools that are reliable and valid, that have some technical adequacy. But most importantly, you want universal screening tools that are predictive of important reading outcomes in the future. This is a really important feature. You need to know early on, like at the beginning of kindergarten, that the score of 8 on PSF predicts passing your 3rd grade end of grade exam. You want the benchmark goal, it's 4?
It's 44, I think. It changes.
So the beginning of kindergarten PSF goal is 8, and at the end of kindergarten, 5, sorry. Beginning of kindergarten PSF score of 5, just as a for instance, predicts passing your 3rd grade state test. Like, that's what I mean by prediction. It predicts reaching the PSF goal at the end of the year. It predicts reaching the NWF goal, the ORF goal by the end of 1st grade, right? It's like links in a chain. We don't want to wait to the end of 1st grade to find out somebody didn't make it. We have these early warning systems. That's the most important function of screening, is that it's predictive. Okay, so here I just overlaid on my mall map the names of those DIBELS 8 measures. Okay, so how do you drop a pin? You are here because of the score on NWF. How do you know that your system needs a tier 2 intervention for fluency? Because of how students score on the ORF words correct, right? So fortunately, you have a system that meets all of the assessment system for screening that meets all of those criteria and lets you connect scores on screening to designing a 3-tier system that will get everybody to those benchmark goals. Here are the, this is a caution, actually. Here are the benchmark goals, right? You're all familiar with this kind of table or some version of this table. What I was going to mention as a caution is that I'm showing the shifting emphasis across, like, let's say K to 3 here, because the importance of these skills shifts and changes over time. Like, we don't ask kindergartners to do ORF. But because DIBELS 8 is a new test, they don't have the research yet to make those kinds of nuanced shifts. So if a measure is given at that grade level, it's given all 3 times. So you may experience lots and lots of kids score low on PSF at the beginning of kindergarten, and lots of 1st graders score low on ORF at the beginning of 1st grade, right? Because that hasn't been worked out yet, so just keep that in mind. We've already talked about the benchmark goals being the lowest acceptable score. This is the way I like people to talk about those scores, is at or above, above benchmark, at benchmark, below, and well below, so that you connect to the odds. You connect to the odds of future reading performance. If you score below benchmark, it's not like, close enough. If you score below benchmark, you've scored in a way that means you have about a 50% chance of being an okay reader in the future, unless instruction changes for you. It's the early warning system, like, we need to have this child on our radar. We need to do something for our system if lots of kids are scoring in this way, is the idea. Do you have questions about those benchmark goals? All of the interpretation of the assessment rests in understanding those benchmark goals. Do the teachers you work with understand those benchmark goals in the ways we've been talking about them? Yeah, this is a really important little nugget of information to bring back to them. It's not the 40th percentile. It's not, if you score at the benchmark goal, like, you're good to go. If you score at the benchmark goal, the number that's just the score, right, the bottom of the at benchmark range, you're hanging on by your fingernails. So let me know if you have questions about that or explaining that. This is, I'm just going to go through this quickly, but this is just an illustration of why in early literacy a criterion referenced test like DIBELS 8 is preferred to a norm referenced test. Because when you use the term standardized, people sometimes equate that to norm referenced. They are two different things. And just to be super confusing, you can interpret DIBELS 8 scores in a norm referenced way. But I don't think that's the best way to do it. The really good way to do it is in a criterion referenced way with the benchmark goal. Okay? In early literacy, in K-3 literacy especially, simply knowing how a student scores compared to their peers is not all that helpful. What we want to know is, has the student scored in a way that predicts good reading in the future? That's what the benchmark goal gives you. So my non-reading example with bad graphics here is, I've got a little child, see that? Can't you tell that's a child? Who's 40 inches tall. And I could ask, is he tall? Is this a tall child? And one way to answer that would be a norm-referenced answer to that. Compared to other students, his age or in his grade, is he tall? So a norm-referenced test would compare that student to other students in the group. And we would say, yeah, he's taller than most. He's at the 75th percentile. But the criterion referenced way of saying or answering, is he tall? Has the student segmented enough phonemes in a minute? The criterion referenced way would answer, is he tall enough for something like getting on a roller coaster at an amusement park? Is he scoring enough words correct per minute to be likely to understand what he's reading, to pass your third grade end of grade test? So it's that is it enough piece that's so valuable in early literacy. You can flip a switch in M-Class and you can see probably local norms and national norms. And I don't know why you'd want to, but you've got that functionality. You can do that. I think that's not as helpful as comparing students to the benchmark goal. Do you have questions about this? This is like nerdy assessment stuff, but I think it's important. I think it's important that you understand what you're looking at when you're interpreting these scores. There's a lot that's really valuable there. Okay, so diagnostic assessment, I'm just going to move through this very quickly. Not given to everyone. It's in-depth. It's time-consuming. Nothing that I described as a characteristic of screening applies to diagnostic. Okay? It should be closely linked to instruction. This is not about diagnosing something. It's just about diagnosing instruction. It's like, what should we teach next? So diagnostic assessments, typically untimed, they're like skill inventories, they're like giving you a scope and sequence, and when students start to not answer correctly, you stop testing, right? Sometimes they'll route you into a lesson within a program. Actually, placement tests that come with instructional materials are really good diagnostics. That's what I would encourage you to move towards. The third type of assessment that you need in MTSS is progress monitoring. Lots of misunderstandings about progress monitoring. This is the place where I most frequently give the answer, it depends. Because there's almost nothing about progress monitoring that can be a blanket statement or like a policy that you put on everybody. This is where the most individualization happens. It's like GPS for educators. This is the feedback mechanism about your instruction. It's not about measuring the student. It's not about finding non-responders. It's about, should I keep teaching the way I've been teaching and what I've been teaching because it's working for this student, or should I make a change? And the farther the student is from the grade level expectation, the more intensive the support is that you're providing, the more frequent you need this feedback. So you should not be making policies, in my opinion, about scores on a screener, especially a composite score, scores on a screener and equating that to frequency of progress monitoring. It's not very helpful. The frequency depends on how quickly do you need to know if you should change your instruction. If the kid is really far behind, you need to know soon. If you're giving lots of resources to that student, you need to know soon. So those are the criteria for deciding the frequency. If you have a progress monitoring graph, you're going to visually eyeball it and see, is the student catching up? Are they staying the same? Is their progress going down? And to be able to make that kind of judgment visually, you need something like 5 to 7 data points on the graph. So if you are collecting progress monitoring monthly, the school year is almost over before you can decide. And you have spent months, perhaps, in instruction that wasn't very helpful. Okay? I'm just going to say one thing. I could talk a lot about progress monitoring. I'm just going to say one thing. If you have lots of students who are at risk, like half of your second grade, okay, scoring below or well below benchmark, it might not be the best use of everyone's time to be progress monitoring all of those students. It might be a better use of everyone's time to talk about how are we going to customize second grade Tier 1 instruction to meet the needs of our second grade students. Okay, so putting the emphasis on instructional planning, instruction, changing Tier 1, customizing Tier 1 would be my suggestion. Even if students are getting intensive support, we are on a quest to find what it takes to enable learning. And having a progress monitoring graph just puts it right there in front of us in black and white or in color, so we can see the effect of, the impact of what and how we're teaching on a student's learning. And so these phase change lines, I don't know if you can do this in M-Class or not, hopefully you can. If not, get a pencil, print it, get a pencil and draw a line. These are really important because this is how you decide which instruction do I want. So let's just say right here, this section of the graph, September to November, this is instruction 1. You with me? And from November to February, I'm going to call this instruction 2. And then from February to May, I'm going to call that instruction 3. Show me on your fingers, now be careful everybody with holding up fingers. Show me on your fingers, do you want for your own child instruction 1, 2, or 3? Which one got the best result? Yeah, see how easy it is to read progress monitoring graphs? This instruction worked better than this one or this one, whatever this was. And this is the quest that we're on. It's not about fail, document failure, still failing. We've tried everything and it's still not working, nothing's working. Now we refer to special ed. That's the old way of doing business. When the special educator receives, so to speak, that student and now doesn't have any clue what to do with him or her, right? What MTSS does is turns that on its head and allows us to find what works first. Find what works first. If what it takes to enable learning is unique and specialized and intensive and can't be maintained with general ed resources, then we suspect a disability because we have just found out that it takes specially designed instruction to get this student to grow. Okay, that's the alternative. I'm going to skip the non-examples. Questions about assessment systems, the types of assessment, how to use them, what that means for building a multi-tiered system of support. Yes? Thank you, because I need to take a drink of water, so please ask your question.
I just have a question about progress monitoring now from just some schools or teachers that want progress monitoring.
Oh, progress monitoring every Friday reduces your instructional opportunities by 20%. Yeah, Dave Tilley turned me on to that many, many years ago. If you take your small group time every Friday to do progress monitoring, assuming you're meeting with your small group every day, like 5 days a week, then you've reduced your instructional minutes by 20%, by 1/5. Right? You've taken Friday, now you only have 4 days of instruction because the 5th day is taken up for assessment. So the alternative is to rotate one student each day. So as everybody else is either doing partner practice or packing up their materials to move on to the next activity, you keep one child with you on Monday, a different child with you on Tuesday. So they're not missing instruction. You're doing the minute of assessment with one child each day, so that you get through the 5 kids in your small group once a week. And if you've got a group of 7, well, close enough, right? Like, but you're rotating. Does that make sense? Okay. We want time devoted to instruction. If I have to skip the progress monitoring so that I can teach, so be it. I would live with that. So a lot of what I have been suggesting to you today is encouraging you to use your screening data beyond simply identifying the individuals who are at risk and using your screening data to reflect the effectiveness and health of your instructional system, your MTSS, primarily your Tier 1 instructional system. If most of your students are at risk, 62% of your students are at risk, do all students need the same instruction? Probably not. Should you implement a whole group core program with fidelity? Probably not. Could you possibly provide effective intervention to everyone who needs it? Probably not. But if we bypass this whole systems conversation, our instructional systems, and only talk about individual students who are at risk, this is what we're doing. We get trapped in this. And we're like gerbils on a wheel, running as fast as we can, trying to get intervention to the next kid and to more kids and more people to do intervention and buy a different program, et cetera, and we're missing the boat. We're not able to catch kids up. So what I'm really thrilled to see in all of your state level materials around MTSS is the problem solving process. And not just about individual students, but about engineering systems. Sitting down as a grade level team, sitting down as a building team, sitting down as a district team to use the DIBELS 8 data to reflect the health and effectiveness of your instructional systems, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 systems of support. That's the kind of conversation that the data system can be really, really useful for. This is what I hope you'll take back to your schools. I think you're going to do some practice about this coincidentally. Again, another like gold star for North Carolina, in my opinion. Tomorrow, you're going to get to practice doing some of this, which is awesome. Now, in my experience, this problem analysis step is where the money is, so to speak. It's unfortunately the part that we skip. It's very, very common that we acknowledge and define and recognize a system level problem, but then we sometimes just jump to a solution. You know, I said earlier in kind of a joking way, if the only tool we have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If all we have is read naturally, nothing against read naturally, but if that's all we have, then we're giving read naturally to everybody as, you know, the intervention. What I would draw your attention to for problem analysis when you're faced with not enough students being on track are these 5 aspects, particularly around your Tier 1 system. And I'm going to focus there, I'm going to harp there, because most places that I work with, it's not about the Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention, it's about Tier 1. So I'm drawing this out to give you some things when you're in those meetings. What can you support the team around? Here are the 5 things, okay? This is the overview, the preview. I'm going to touch on each one at a time. I asked about the letters training and the requirements for increasing educator knowledge about the science of reading, because it's really important that not just teachers get access to that research base. It's really important that school psychologists, speech language pathologists, counselors if you have them, administrators of all sorts also are given the advantage of what's in the reading research. And you're wondering, why the refrigerator? I'm happy to say this is not my refrigerator, because that's a lot of food. Maybe when my boys are home it looks like that, but my refrigerator stopped working recently. And because I don't have any background knowledge about how refrigerators operate, I had zero problem-solving capacity to fix that refrigerator. If it was plugged in and it still wasn't keeping things cold, that was the end of it for me. So in a problem-solving setting, when you're trying to unpack what could be the possible reasons why our second graders aren't understanding text, these are some things that can be really helpful. Why are our kindergartners struggling with these basic foundational skills, right? So these are what I walked you through in terms of what I think are the really essential, most important findings from the research. I'm going to encourage you to make sure every educator in your system, and I'm going to say your community, understands some of those big ideas from the research. Parents, other aspects or members of your school community, bring them along in this education process as well. We've talked about that. We didn't talk about the learning hierarchy. And I'm going to go back to that driving analogy. One of the most useful things that you can see in your DIBELS 8 data is the difference between accuracy and fluency. And fluency is not about speed. Fluency is the natural artifact of owning a skill. Fluency is this dude, we hope. If we encounter him on the highway, I actually saw somebody driving one time with a book held in front of them. And I got off the exit and got away from that person. But the idea is, we can see in the DIBELS 8 data, if you pull up the probe details, if the student is in the acquisition phase with the skill, which looks like lots of mistakes and too slow, or if they're in the fluency stage, not just about oral reading, but about NWF and PSF and letter naming, which looks like accurate and automatic responding. Or if they are so accurate and automatic that they're ready to generalize. So think about teaching your children to drive. Think about anything new that you've acquired recently. Anybody learned to play pickleball? This is like the rage. Yeah, like, yeah, I'm learning. I'm still in the accuracy stage of pickleball. I'm still trying to figure out, how do I hold this thing? How am I supposed to swing my arm? Where am I supposed to stand? Where's my partner supposed to be? Like, slow and making a lot of mistakes, okay? If your children are in the accuracy stage of the learning hierarchy, they need more instruction, not practice. Don't send them home to practice something that they haven't acquired yet. Don't put them on a computer to practice something that they haven't acquired yet. Don't put them in a center or with a partner to practice something they are not yet accurate with. Your DIBELS 8 data will put this right in front of you. So maybe I'm sensing that you see some of this happening in the schools that you work with. Show them the data, right? Pull up the probe details. If there's lots of red, if there's lots of errors, you are not in the fluency building stage. You are in the accuracy building stage. You're in the acquisition stage. You are learning which pedal is start or go, which pedal is stop in driving a car. Okay? This is a really useful use of your DIBELS 8 data to tease this out. If a student is fluent, you'll see it by fast and accurate response, like effortless response. I can drive a car and talk to a passenger. I can drive a car and think about my to-do list, because the act of driving the car is no longer at the conscious level. That's what we want for reading text. We want automatic, all the basic skills that cause us to free up our brain power to focus on the meaning of what we're reading. We want that to be so overlearned that it just flows out of us without thinking about it. We cannot help but read a word that's in front of us. Where I think we got it wrong with the balanced literacy era, was that we expected students to apply and transfer to text before they were accurate and fluent. We were using text as the tool to teach the skill of reading instead of using text as the application or generalization. So once students are accurate and fluent with word recognition, they apply it in text. So until they're accurate and fluent, the text that they're reading independently should be controlled. Just like when I taught my kids to drive a car, I didn't start on the highway. I started in the swim club parking lot in the winter when nobody was around. I controlled the environment for the beginner, right? That's what decodable text does for you. Now, the second aspect, if you are not getting at least 80% of your students to those benchmark goals with the first way you teach reading in Tier 1, the second thing to consider is your schedule. How many of you are or have been building administrators? Okay, you know how hard this is. The schedule is a bear. So if you cannot pull off what I'm about to suggest in anything other than kindergarten, that's understandable. Or if you have to prioritize a grade or two, pick KM1. Get this right in KM1. Get the schedule right to allow these things to happen. Things like everybody floods Tier 1, kind of like that walk to read or win time thing that I was talking about, but it's happening in Tier 1. Okay? Tier 1, small group, might be first thing in the morning. Tier 2, for some students, not everybody, some is happening as an additional dose at another time of day. Everybody's not teaching reading. This is first grade, the second column, this one. Everybody's not teaching reading at the same time of day. Somebody's going to have to teach reading in the afternoon. I know. Everybody likes to teach it in the morning, but to get a schedule like this where all of the other support people can flood the grade level to differentiate Tier 1 to reduce risk, you're going to have to perhaps prioritize K and 1. What do we need to teach as our Tier 2 intervention system? It's right here in the data. Letter sounds, blending letter sounds, reading text accurately. I don't have to have a SST meeting to design my Tier 2. Your screening data can be very, very helpful for helping you design what that Tier 1 instruction should look like. This is a graphic that I worked with Voyager Sopris to create to remind everybody that the simple view does not mean teach word recognition in the primary grades, and once they can decode, shift the focus to language comprehension. So it looks like a wishbone, or as I recently discovered, the sign at the drive-thru at Chick-fil-A. I'm going to take it, you know what I'm talking about. If you, that's the shape. So no wonder I picked that shape, because I've sat in front of that sign at Chick-fil-A drive-thru a lot. I'm going to take a picture of it and put it on this slide the next time I present it. We have to do both language comprehension and word recognition from day 1 of kindergarten, both explicitly, both urgently, in tandem. We might, because of the needs of our students, teach the word recognition skills in small, skill-based, flexible groups, while we are teaching whole group language comprehension through read aloud and discussion. This is what I've seen work really, really well, until we get to this pivot point, which is when students are fluent enough in grade level text that I can start asking them to demonstrate reading comprehension. How would I know that they're accurate and fluent in grade level text? What would tell me? Oral reading fluency. You screen everybody on it. Hooray. You know this. You can help teachers and other educators make this decision. Should I be asking every second grader to read text independently and demonstrate reading comprehension? Or should I do business differently in Tier 1, where text is used as application of the word recognition skills that I'm fixing up for half of the second graders. I'm going back and remediating those, while I am simultaneously supporting them with grade level vocabulary, content knowledge, concepts through read aloud and discussion. The things come together when kids are accurate and fluent in grade level text. That's what I'm calling the pivot point there. Here's how this played out in first grade. This was Sharon Dunn's building when she was a principal in California. First graders, widely divergent needs in first grade. Kids were kind of all over the map. So they made the decision to teach language comprehension skills in an integrated way, whole group, heterogeneous whole group, very valuable for language comprehension, through read aloud and discussion. And they decided to teach phonemic awareness, phonics and spelling, reading fluency and reading comprehension in small, skill-based, flexible groups. And I'll show you what that looked like. They actually, in her building, they hired additional paraprofessionals who they trained in the same instructional program that the teachers were trained in, so that they could get the smallest groups for the most struggling students. They're at the top left of this graphic, and the biggest groups for the most on-track students in the bottom right. So students came out of the 4 homerooms, so to speak, across the first grade to be grouped by skill, so that instruction during Tier 1 could be focused like a laser on what students needed next, as much as possible. They had discretionary money that they used to hire additional bodies just in the morning to make this happen, to get Tier 1 differentiated. You might have different constraints. This is what your building leadership team is problem solving around. What are our resources? What are our needs? How do we get what our students need into place? These students who were the most struggling are the ones that get the double dose, the extra dose at Tier 2. And if you have enough resources, it might be also these students get a double dose at Tier 2. So you could be sitting here thinking, yeah, Stephanie, this all sounds great, but it won't work in my reality. Here might be some of the things that are floating around in your mind. The yes buts, I call them. Yeah, it all sounds great, but you don't know what I'm up against. You don't know how hard I've got it. You don't know the constraints in my school. You don't know what our kids are like, what our teachers are like. You don't know what our principal is like, right? These are not complaints. These are exactly the topics that your problem solving should be focused on. Whatever you are sitting here thinking to yourselves, that all sounds great, but fill in the blank. Whatever you fill in the blank with, whatever is the difference between what I asked you to imagine not this morning, when I started the talk with the magic wand, you know what the barriers are, you know what the obstacles are, you know what could change for a better outcome for students in your system. That's exactly what you should plug into that problem-solving process. We've become familiar with problem-solving about individual systems and creating an intervention plan for an individual student. I'm asking you to extend that to your system. Your system needs an intervention plan. That's what I want you to write. I want you to write an intervention plan for Tier 1. That's system level problem solving. That's what I wish all the state legislatures would mandate. We send a letter home that says, here's how we are changing our system to better meet the needs of our students. Okay, I'm gonna skip through all of the who's on the team and what the team does. You can read those yourselves. The point is, you have an opportunity to first and foremost prevent reading problems from happening in the first place with the way you teach reading in kindergarten and first grade. You've already got the assessment system in place. You've got the information about who needs what. Now it's just a matter of bringing that information to bear at a systems level. Use your screening results to reflect the health and effectiveness of your Tier 1 system. And if you find that your Tier 1 is not as healthy as it should be, if Tier 1 is not getting at least 80% of students to those minimum expectations, the things that you can change are the amount of time you have for Tier 1, what and how is being taught in Tier 1, how you're grouping students, how you're providing service to students in that Tier 1. That's your best opportunity to shrink the number of students who are at risk, the number of students who need something in addition to classroom reading instruction, so that Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention can actually do the job of catching kids up to those minimum benchmark goals. That's the work I hope that I've given you some inspiration around today, some funny ways to talk about, perhaps, and it's the work I hope you will take back to your systems. Thank you all for your time, for your attention, and the work that you're doing. Appreciate it.